At my nephew's 18th birthday, my husband raised a plastic cup and announced he was filing for divorce. "Don't repeat my mistake, Tyler," he said, clapping the kid on the shoulder. "One wrong wife, and you've got a 100-pound weight chained to your leg for years. Take Laura, for example." He jerked his chin in my direction, smiled like he'd made a joke, and added, "I've decided to file for divorce." The living room went so quiet, even the fridge in the kitchen seemed to shut up. Somebody tapped a plastic cup against the table by accident. I was the first one to clap. I stood up and applauded. "Finally, Mark," I said. "I was starting to worry you'd never grow a spine." His eyes went small and round, like those little plastic lids from the condiment station. It's very convenient when, by the time they drag you out for a public execution, you already know the sentence. I'd had plenty of time to prepare. It all started with a banana peel by the front door of our quiet little place in suburban America. If you've ever wondered how long a person can live with a leg broken in 3 places and a husband broken along his entire length, trust me, the leg is the easier one. That day I was walking home from work. 1 block to go. Manicured lawns, neat trash cans, other people's dogs in other people's windows. In one hand, I had a leash with Poppy. In the other, a bag of groceries. The banana peel was right in front of our building. Textbook. I saw it. Logged it. Thought, who even does this? This isn't a cartoon. And stepped on it anyway. Then there was ice, sky, crunch, scream. The world shattered into pieces. The dog barking, the bags flying, pain detonating along my nerves, the asphalt cold and hostile under my back. Ma'am, can you hear me?" someone said over me, a shadow with a giant backpack. It was Emma, young, in a school hoodie and sneakers, with that expression normal people reserve for zombies. Panic first, action plan second. "I called 911, she said, already holding my phone. "They're on their way. It hurts a lot, right?" "Just a little." I exhaled through my teeth, staring at my leg bent at the wrong angle. "Don't let her run off." Her was Poppy, a brown dachshund with show dog bloodlines, officially registered as Hidden Meadows Princess Poppy and unofficially registered as the only sane investment I'd made in my life. Right now she was tearing around the lawn, screaming at the universe. "I've got her," Emma said, catching the leash. "Who should I call?" "My husband. Mark. Speed dial, first button." She tapped it. "Hello? Is this the wife?" she asked carefully. "Your wife fell by your building. We're about to go to the hospital." I could hear his voice even without speakerphone. "Yeah, sure. Next you'll tell me I need to wire money to the sheriff's office. Kid, you gotta come up with something more original." "Sir, this isn't a prank," Emma said, offended. "She can't get up. I'm gonna hand the phone to a paramedic." "Kid, hang up," my husband answered. "I'll call Laura myself." He didn't. The ambulance got there fast. You don't really appreciate American healthcare until they're loading you into it on a stretcher in front of your neighbors while your dog screams like you're dropping her off at a kill shelter. By the entrance, Gail appeared, my neighbor from the 3rd floor, owner of a tiny cafe and a pug named Frankie. "Is that Laura?" she asked when she saw Poppy. "That's her dachshund. I know them." The paramedic was already undoing the leash. "You her neighbor? Can you take the dog for a bit?" "Of course, and I'll text her mom. She comes into the cafe sometimes." "Don't text my mom," I mumbled through the morphine. "My mom already gets enough. Just... Poppy." "Don't worry, Poppy's about to live a better life than you," Gail assured me, expertly scooping up the dog. "Frankie and I got this." That's how Poppy moved in with the neighbor, and I moved into the trauma unit at County General Hospital. I didn't see my husband until I was already there. They wheeled me into a room late that night, cast on the leg, bandages on my arm, head full of fog. In the corner on a folding chair sat my mom, Linda. Next to her was my stepdad, Gary, with that calm, solid look on his face I'd once hated so much it made me move out. Too stable. Too reliable. "Well, hi," Mom said, wiping her eyes. "You really picked the least budget way to take a day off." "You could have just emailed your boss and said you broke your leg," Gary nodded. "But yeah, the banana has flair." I smirked. It hurt. Mark walked in half an hour later. "Oh, you're awake," he said, like he'd been expecting the opposite. So, how are you?" "Fantastic," I said. "Doctor says I'll be ready for the Olympics in no time." Mom shot him the look people use when they find a roach in their salad. "We thought you'd come straight to the ER, she said. "I was busy," Mark shrugged. "We were just about to head out to the lake with my parents. I figured it was one of those scam calls. You know, your relatives had an accident, send money." "It is surprising they never call you," I said. "You've got experience." He pretended not to hear that. "The doctor said you're going to be here a while," he went on, staring at his shoes. "Well, it's fine. I can get you something on DoorDash." "Mark," Mom set her cup down very gently, very firmly. "She's going to need clothes, chargers, towels, books. You can run home and bring them, right?" "Right now?" He sounded genuinely shocked. "We're already supposed to head out early, beat traffic, and I thought you'd stay with her." That was the moment something inside me went deaf. I lay there under an IV, tubing in my vein, a stranger's hand wrapped around mine, and it still hurt less than that line. "I thought you'd stay with her." Mom looked at Gary. "I'll go," he said. "You stay here. Mark, it's not hard to swing by the hospital on your way, right?" "Well, fine," my husband agreed, like I'd asked him to donate a kidney. "Only my car keys are at Mom's. She's driving tomorrow." "I'll give you mine," Gary said. "You're a big boy. You'll manage." Mark looked at him the way my nephew Tyler looks at algebra, and left. I slept through the first day. Then came the petty domestic wars. Mark showed up the next afternoon with a single t-shirt, a charger, and a 3-year-old magazine. "You wanted a book," he said. "I wanted my books," I said, "and slippers, and a real set of pajamas." "Well, I didn't know where you keep things." "In the closet, where humans usually keep clothes." "I didn't want to go through your stuff," he said, offended. "That's personal." Apparently the only personal thing in his world was his time and that lake trip with his parents. Meanwhile, Gail was texting me photos of Poppy. In one, Poppy was curled in a pretzel on the couch next to her pug. In another, she was on a little rug by a cafe table with the proud face of "I work here now." The texts came with messages. "Emma stopped by, brought Poppy a toy. Don't stress, we've got this covered." That's how I learned the schoolgirl's name was Emma, that she lived in the next building, that she had a little brother named Timmy and a mom named Natalie who swung by Gail's cafe after her shift. In the same stretch of time, my husband managed to text me once. "Mom's asking if you mind if we still go to the lake. Everything's paid for." I wrote back that I didn't mind anything at all, on account of lying in a hospital bed with a cast and opiates, and filed the question away. When they discharged me, I didn't go home alone. My mother delivered me. "Gary and I will take turns coming over," she said, "and Emma already volunteered to help walk Poppy." Mark met us at the apartment door like someone caught home in his underwear. "Oh, you're here already," he said, eyeing the crutches, Mom the bags. Come on in." The place was clean. Suspiciously clean. "You cleaned?" I asked. "Mom dropped by," he admitted. "Wasn't a big deal for her." Of course. Nothing was ever a big deal for his mom if it meant she could end the conversation with, "What would you do without us?" Her name was Brenda. She was the type of woman who says, "I don't butt into your life," while openly discussing how many kids you should have and when. Once upon a time, she'd been the one to explain that Mark was quite a catch. "You're 28 already, Laura," she'd said at some family dinner back when we were just dating. "Good man, stable job, his own car, none of that nonsense. Don't let him get away." I was, objectively, also quite a catch. Design engineer at a manufacturing company, my own apartment bought before the marriage, graduated with honors. In her system, that was more like extra reward points at the grocery store. Nice, but not essential. She's the one who insisted I put Mark on the lease. "You don't want your husband to feel like a tenant," Brenda said. "You're a family. Everything should be 50-50. Back then, it sounded reasonable. Now I looked at my crutches propped by the wall and thought that next time I'd sign anything she wanted, as long as it wasn't a lease. Living with a cast and a husband whose favorite phrase is "you're home anyway" is a special kind of extreme sport. Mark would get up in the morning, turn on the TV, drink his coffee, and say, "I'd help you with breakfast, but I gotta get to work." He'd come home at night, sit down at his computer and say, "I'd go get groceries, but you're home all day anyway. You can just order." Sometimes he'd throw in, "Well, I can take the trash out if you want." Against that backdrop, the people who actually showed up for me looked almost cartoonish. Mom and Gary, bringing food, helping me shower, hauling water. Gail, taking Poppy on walks, bringing me coffee from her cafe. Emma, doing homework at my kitchen table, walking the dog, tutoring her little brother in math, and me in patience. One evening, Gail said, almost casually, "My cousin's a divorce lawyer. Hope you never need her, but if you do, she's vicious in the best way." "I'm married," I said automatically. "I've noticed," Gail said, deadpan. "That's why I mentioned it." I laughed then. Back then. Brenda and Martin didn't drop by often, but when they did, they made it count. "Laura, you have to understand, it's very hard on Mark right now," Brenda would say, looking at me like I'd broken my leg on purpose just to ruin their plans. "He's always running between home and work." Between the couch and the fridge, I wanted to say. I didn't. "And also," she'd go on, "we've got a big date coming up. Tyler's turning 18. We rented a lake house. You'll be walking by then, right?" "On crutches?" "Sure," I said. "Oh, then it's fine," she said brightly. "It's just family. Nobody's going to judge." No one would judge, no. But they would absolutely watch me limp around with plates and salads like it was a spectator sport. I already knew Mark would go no matter what. The only question was whether I'd be going too. I went. Here's the thing. I didn't want to give Brenda another angle for her endless monologues about how ungrateful I was and how I'd abandoned her grandson on his biggest day. The lake house looked like a postcard. Wood siding, a porch with bunting, grill, string lights. Inside, paper plates, chips, dips, plastic cups, boxed wine, and Martin's signature homemade liquor that he called moonshine and poured into mason jars with pride. I sat at the table, hanging onto my crutch like a mast, and counted how many times Brenda would say, "We do everything for you." Mark ran around the grill, basking in his role as Fire Lord. Tyler, tall, skinny, permanently glued to his phone, was doing his best to pretend center stage wasn't the worst place on earth. "So, Laura," Martin plopped down beside me, "you thinking about kids yet?" "I'm thinking about not breaking the other leg," I said. "Kids? Later." "You two really shouldn't drag your feet," Brenda cut in. "Biological clock and all." I looked at my crutches and thought there was more than one thing ticking. When everyone had eaten, Mark stood up with his cup. "So," he said, "I've got a little speech, too." Heads turned. "Tyler, don't rush into marriage. Study, work, travel. One wrong wife and you're chained to a weight for decades." He grinned. Like me. He turned to me. Laura here is my ball and chain. Someone laughed nervously. And on that note, he went on, raising his cup, I've decided to file for divorce. The silence was so thick I could hear somebody cracking open a beer behind the house. I stood up. Standing up took a minute. Thank you, Martin's. Oh, come on, just a sip. It's not that strong. But I stayed upright. And I clapped. Mark, I said, thank you for finally finding the courage to say out loud what you've been doing for a while now. What's that supposed to mean? He blinked. I mean, I turned to the table. When your husband's business trip bag contains a lacy bra that definitely isn't your size, a gift card for a hotel, and a receipt for 2 coffees to go, that's usually not a sales meeting. Somebody dropped a fork. Laura, Brenda hissed, don't air dirty laundry in public. This isn't public, I said. This is your rental by some random lake in Indiana. Tyler was staring at me with the face of someone who just realized adults don't have any idea what they're doing. I'm fine with the divorce, Mark, I told my husband. If you want, you can think of it as a present to Tyler. On his birthday, his family finally stopped lying. I set my cup on the table, grabbed my crutch, walked out onto the porch, breathed in lake and grilled meat, and headed for the car. Gary drove me home. Poppy met me at the door like I'd come back from deployment, which, in a way, I had. The next day, a delegation showed up at my door. In front, Mark. Behind him, Brenda, Martin, his sister Tracy, and the birthday boy himself, Tyler, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. We came to talk like civilized people, Brenda said the moment I opened. So we don't have to drag this into court. Mark pulled out a folder. This is a marital settlement agreement, he announced, very serious, as if he'd drafted it himself. Voluntary division of property. I sat them down in the living room and took a seat across from them. Poppy crawled under my chair and started a low growl. The agreement said, more or less, that Mark gets our car, the TV, the game console, the laptop, a fair portion of the joint savings, half my bank account. I get the privilege of living in my own apartment, some household appliances, the moral high ground. They'd quietly listed Poppy under his column. I'm sorry, what? I asked. Poppy is joint property too? We picked her out with Mark, Brenda jumped in, and Mark also paid for dog food. Once, I said. When you handed him a 20 and said it was our first family contribution toward the dog. Laura, can we not get bogged down in details? Mark's tone darkened. We're trying to do this amicably. Amicably, I said, would have involved asking me first and then parading over here. I stood up, took the folder, shoved it back into his hands, and walked to the door. Tracy, Tyler, I said, opening it. Nothing personal, but I'm about to say things you really don't need in your head. They shot out onto the landing faster than kids bolt at the lunch bell. Mom, I heard outside. Can we wait in the car? Of course, honey, Brenda said sweetly. I shut the door and turned to the 3 still on my couch. Okay, I said. So, which one of you is amicable again? After they finally left, they left when I offered to call the police and get this visit on record as an attempt to coerce a signature. I called Gail. Remember how you said you had a cousin who's a divorce lawyer? Second cousin, she corrected. Janet. She's a shark. You'll like her. That's how Janet entered my life. Short, wiry, white-haired, with a stare that made Brenda unconsciously clutch her purse to her chest at our first consult. You're not signing that, Janet said, flipping through their agreement. You're going to file on them for trying to bully you into signing, but we'll get to that. Let's start simple. We started simple. The apartment was bought before the marriage with my money. The car was in Mark's name because he's the one who uses it more. My paycheck regularly went toward the mortgage, utilities, groceries, His paycheck regularly went toward helping his parents, which somehow kept ending up in a joint account with Brenda. I paid for Poppy, her insurance, the vet, the shows, because she's your dog, you pay for her. Classic, Janet said. Mom builds her son like he's a stock portfolio, wife underwrites the whole thing. In court, it all looked even more entertaining. The judge was a woman in her 60s with that "I've seen you people 100 times" face. Brenda tried to go on about how they'd invested in the renovation until Janet handed over a stack of receipts, all paid off my card. Mark tried to explain that the savings account with his mother was for emergencies in case something happened to him, until the judge asked why his wife wasn't on the account if it was about emergencies.
Well,
he started.
"You've had plenty of time to add your wife to that account,"
the judge said.
"but you chose not to. Noted."
In the end, Mark got the car and some electronics. I kept the apartment. As far as joint savings, the court didn't find much of anything because the only thing joint about our finances had been my income. There was a separate line item for Poppy. "A dog acquired during the marriage," the judge read, "was in fact financially supported by the wife. Considering the animal's health, attachment, and both parties' schedules, the court finds it reasonable to grant custody of the dog to Mrs. Bird." Mark flinched. I thought at least we'd share the dog.
"She's not a TV,"
the judge said.
"You're welcome to visit her by mutual agreement, if Mrs. Bird finds that appropriate."
I did not. Janet insisted we draft a separate document stating that Poppy belongs solely to me, and Mark has no right to remove her under any circumstances. He signed. The car and his pride mattered more. I only knew about his new life because there's a limit to how much you can avoid knowing. My old boss mentioned, very casually, that Vanessa, the admin we had at the front desk, is living with Mark now. I knew Vanessa on a superficial level. Long blonde hair, long nails, endless selfies, and a habit of saying, "I'm doing everything around here," while Denise, our supervisor, quietly did 90% of the actual work. According to Tracy, whom I occasionally ran into in the dairy aisle, Vanessa's plan looked like this. "We're gonna move into a bigger house. Mark's buying me a car. We'll have a pool." Reality looked like a tiny rental by a busy road, and the old sedan Mark had fought so hard to keep in court. "She complains all the time," Tracy whispered, standing between the milk and the yogurt. "Says Mark promised her a big life, but he keeps having money problems." Some people have money problems. Some have memory problems, like forgetting that money doesn't grow out of the word promised. It grows out of the word worked. I genuinely did not care. My life, unexpectedly, had its own thing going on. Mom and Gary helped rearrange the apartment to fit how I actually lived. Gail roped me into doing some remote admin work for her cafe while I eased back into my old job. Emma got into college, kept working part-time for Gail, and still swung by to check on Princess Poppy. Dana, a grad student from our dog park crew, taught Poppy a few tricks. Colin and Paula brought thermoses and gossip to the park, so I stayed fully updated without even opening Facebook. And suddenly, without Mark, there was more air in the apartment, more laughter, more people who showed up just because, not because his mother needed to inspect whether I was turning her son against the family. On New Year's Eve, the real one, not the "my life will totally change this fall" one, I was baking cookies. Poppy sat under the table, making very sure humanity didn't drop anything important. Mom and Gary were due around 8. Emma had sworn she'd drag Timmy over for the ball drop, which in our case meant watching Times Square on TV. Someone rang the bell. I checked the time. 7:30. "We're early," I called, opening the door. "The cookies are still warm, but—" Mark was on the threshold. He was holding one of those giant gift baskets people win at office raffles: coffee, cookies, a bottle of wine, some kind of sausage.
Hey, Laura, he said. Happy New Year, early.
Poppy came out from under the table, looked at him, and growled. Not loudly, just enough to make her point.
Can I come in?
He asked. Why? I asked back. He shifted from foot to foot.
I wanted to talk.
I just looked at him. Somewhere in the last Christmas-New Year stretch, he'd been living with Vanessa, arguing, juggling bills, trying to figure out why the world hadn't formed a line to reward his effort.
I've thought it all through, Mark said. I was wrong. About a lot. About almost everything. I'll sign whatever you want. Can we start over?
Start over? I repeated.
Yeah.
He tried to smile.
Fresh start.
I glanced over his shoulder. Same old hallway, same front door, same welcome doormat. Only now I knew that fresh start in his language meant flipping to a blank page without reading the previous one. Mark, I said. I had to break my leg to finally read what was written on page 1. He blinked. I'm not interested in reruns, I went on. Not the leg, not the page. I took the basket and handed it back to him. This isn't about being mad, I added. You really did set me free when you announced that divorce. I'd be an idiot to voluntarily chain that weight back onto my leg. Behind me, keys rattled in the lock.
Laura, we're a little early. We thought...
Mom stepped into the hallway, saw Mark, and wiped the smile off her face.
Oh. We on time?
Gary asked, eyeing the scene. Perfect timing, I said. I stepped back, but I didn't open the door wider. Happy New Year, Mark, I said. I genuinely hope next year you learn to tell the difference between people who love you and people who use you.
He started.
And I also hope, I added, that next time you say, I've thought it all through, you actually have. I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I just closed it. Poppy trotted over, nudged my leg with her nose, the one that was finally almost healed, barely a scar, and sat down beside me. Well, Princess, Mom said, shall we raise a glass to the banana? Absolutely, I said. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is a banana peel by your front door. It makes it painfully obvious who bends down to help you up and who stands there explaining why it's not a good time for them to swing by. Everything else is just logistics, lawyers, and one small dachshund named Poppy. So what do you think? Did we go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more.